Around the end of the 2000s, music in general, but especially indie music, was at a crossroads. You see, what was happening in the mainstream culture was synth and the use of like beat drops and so on and so forth, and mixing the genres together was starting to happen more and more. Ergo, the term the drop was starting to happen in mainstream music. Now, of course, indie music does not follow the same beat, right? That's the whole point of it, is that you can make your own style of music that you want to make. However, it almost was the elephant in the room that indie bands had to acknowledge that their sound also had to change. Guitars were just as important still. You still saw your normal 4 or 5 piece bands. And in a minute, we're going to talk about where indie music was at the time. But there was no question that synth and keyboard was going to start to take over the sound of indie. This sets the stage for one of the 2010s biggest indie songs to date, Young Blood by the Naked and Famous. How it got there and its impact on the Naked and Famous themselves and indie music in general, well, that's what we're going to talk about this week. Welcome to the Mainstream Indie Music Podcast. We're so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for the support. 2025 was such an amazing year for this channel, and it's all to you guys. Many of you are still new, like you're here for the first time. Maybe one video catches your eye on a band or a song that you really liked, and then you start to check out the older videos as well. So before I begin, we do have a full video history of the Naked and Famous themselves. So if you want to check that after, or if that's kind of what you're looking for, I would highly recommend that. This video is going to just solely be on the song Young Blood itself. Without further ado, let's begin. Now again, before we even get to the Naked and famous hit, we have to set the stage. Indie music forever had been very guitar heavy. You think of bands like Arcade Fire, you think of bands like especially The Strokes, Arctic Monkeys, and Block Party, and so on and so forth. It was guitars. That's how it always had been. That was the culture around it. And while they would incorporate maybe some different instruments along with it, the rock alternative and rock indie was literally at its heartbeat. That's who they were. But the tide was starting to shift. Bands before Naked and Famous that you can think of, like MGMT and Passion Pit, were starting to really toy with the idea that guitars did not have to be your main sound. That's what sets up the stage for the Naked and Famous. Now, like I said in the introduction, this is not going to be so much a history of the band itself, as we've already talked about the band history, but rather the song Young Blood. It's not just the music and sound of the song, which we're going to talk to about in a minute. It was also the lyrics of the song. It really just encompassed what indie music was about, especially at the time. Young love, restlessness, being emotionally kind of vulnerable to a loved one was right at the core image. And really the haunting voice of the lead singer, which again we're going to get to in a minute, really just highlighted that even more so. So let's begin by kind of stripping the song down. It's no question while listening to it, you can't ignore the layers of sound that is going on. It begins with that iconic synth riff, that continuous keyboard sound continues throughout the entire thing, kind of fading and going. Comes to the forefront and then it kind of hides in the background as well, working along with the other instruments, because right after that infamous hook, you have the power-driven chords of the guitar right behind it, played by Tom, and then the amazing drums, which keep it a steady beat throughout the entire thing, really. But the second thing is the vocals. Alyssa, her vocals, I think, are one of the most underrated vocals of especially the 2010s indie scene in general. Her voice just soars in a lot of their hits, and credit to her, it comes from her coming from her father was a musician as well. So it was really a lifelong thing. Now, this all circles back to our main theme, young blood and the song and genres, right? Because like I said, at the time, the tone of indie was starting to shift. They were starting to go from guitars and starting to kind of experiment with synth and kind of a broader musical landscape. And at first, I think a lot of people were wondering, well, is it going to just be you pick one or the other? Maybe you fit more into the old school way of rock alternative, or you kind of embrace this new school way, and there's no middle ground. Well, this song was huge in blending both these things together, and it was a massive hit. It did enjoy some mainstream success. I even think if you were to play that song, I think a lot of people would kind of think like, oh, you know what, like, I only listen to like pop music, but I remember that riff. I remember that keyboard playing in the background. I kind of a funny story. My parents were huge fans of the show Chuck, and so even hearing that synth, instantly they know the song, because it was on the TV show Chuck. Really, its impact on indie music cannot be understated. You think of bands like M83, I think was kind of the final evolution of merging both of these sounds together. But definitely, the Naked and Famous really helped put that bridge together between the kind of the old school, simply just guitars, and using synth and keyboards in the bands as well. I wouldn't quite venture to say it's solely just the Naked and Famous that did this, but I would say they were a big contributing factor into doing it. To this day, the Naked and Famous still continue to tour. And the song Young Blood is, like I was kind of mentioning to and alluding to earlier, is in TV shows, movies, especially during that time period, like the 2010s and mid-2010s. I mean, hey, if you pull any playlist of indie music from like this century even, it could be like they could squeeze it into the 2000s or the 2010s or just indie music in general. I almost guarantee you that song is going to be in there. Maybe you might even throw in Punching in a Dream might be in there as well. But yeah, to this day, they have had some lineup changes, but the Naked and Famous still continue to tour and make music still. What do you all think of the song Young Blood by Naked and Famous? Were you guys like me, pumping out this song in the middle of the night, maybe a road trip with friends, just belting out the chorus, jamming out? Let me know in the comments. I'll see you all next week. Peace.